To Creation Science 116. We're going to take a look at theistic evolution and some of the errors of it and flaws and even dangers of theistic evolution. But first, we need to celebrate. We went down to Twin Cities Creation Science Association to see Dr. Randy Galuza, and that was so much fun. And I just wanted him to feel encouraged. All the stuff he does for creation, I wanted the room to be packed because normally it's half empty or more. And that's what it was. It was packed. It was so neat. You know, I contacted the event center and I said, hey, the president of ICR is coming on campus. Do you want your students to know about it? And they said, we don't do any outside promotions. And so then I called the president's office and asked them the same thing. And they said, well, send us some information. And I did. And they said, yeah, we want to promote it. So they made posters. So that was exciting. And he had a message specifically for the young people. And he said, it's very rare when a paradigm comes down and you get to put up a new paradigm. But he says, that's what's happening now. That's what's happening in the creation evolution. Evolution's falling apart. And he's got the model that can replace it. So that was pretty encouraging to see. And then I went to St. Cloud State for their graduation, and I tried to get people to think about Jesus as much as I could. And I was there for several hours. A photographer came up and said, hey, tell me about your sign. And I said, I think we need to love our enemies. You know, the world needs Jesus. You know, Iran needs Jesus. Israel needs Jesus. We need that Jesus to love our enemies. And I was talking to him, and he said that they wanted to put him on medication for cholesterol. And he was pre-diabetic, but then he changed his diet and he was a vegetarian. And then his numbers worked out, but he was still smoking. And I asked him, well, how did you quit? And he said he was at the doctor, and the doctor always tries to get him to quit smoking. And he says, all right, you're 45. And this is when the graph starts changing between smokers and non-smokers. This is when they start having health issues and dying earlier where the non-smokers don't. And he said, would you rather smoke or see your daughter's wedding? Because he had a 4-year-old daughter. And the doctor asked him, which one do you love more, smoking or your daughter? And that was the thing, that he was able to stop smoking with that. And so that was a lot of fun. Last week, I was supposed to debate Grand Canyon on Saturday, but there was some trouble with his modem. So we just did a Creation Science 101. And so that got some more time there. But tomorrow night, we're doing the debate. Grand Canyon debate tomorrow. That's going to be at 7 p.m. Central Time. And you just go into Standing for Truth YouTube channel. And that'll be interesting. I got 25 minutes to ask him questions. He has 25 minutes to ask me questions. And that's the kind of debate I like. Okay, let's jump into theistic evolution. You know, I was flown down to Houston to give a hydroplate talk. And I was there for a week, and I said, you line up the creation talks, I'll knock them down. And I don't know how he did it, but he lined up Sunday school, youth group, this College of Biblical Studies. I did their chapel online. And whenever I talk to pastors, I like to pound theistic evolution into the ground, you know, so it never gets resurrected. So let's talk about what has happened. You know, a few hundred years ago, everybody believed there was a flood, according to the Bible. But then in 1795, James Hutton, he wrote a book, Theory of the Earth, and he introduced uniformitarianism. That's present processes are the only way you can explain past events. You know, the present is the key to the past. That's what they say. And so it caused people to doubt the thousands of years. And then in 1814, Thomas Chalmers, he came up with the gap theory, and that squeezed millions of years into the Bible. Then in 1830, Charles Lyell, he wrote Principles of Geology, and that he came up with the geologic column. Now, this is before radiometric dating. This is before all of that. He just looked at those layers and said, they're really old, and people believed them. And so then he said that it takes millions of years for those layers, and so then people began to doubt the flood. And then in 1859, Charles Darwin came along with The Origin of Species, and he had people doubt the God of creation. God the creator, because he had natural selection. That's how they changed. And then in 1909, Cyrus Scofield came up with the reference Bible, and he has the gap theory in there. And this reference Bible was used, it was the first Bible with study notes in it. And then they started to use this or one of the first at least, and it was they began to use this at seminaries. And a lot of the seminaries were using the Schofield Reference Bible, and he had the gap theory, which is also called the ruin reconstruction theory. Okay, and then this is, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, gap, for millions of years, okay? Because they're trying to squeeze the geologic column in there, and you can't do it after Adam because there's a genealogy in Luke 3 from Adam to Jesus, or Jesus to Adam, and it's got all the years how they lived and the chronology, and it doesn't work. So they have to squeeze it in there before Adam, and this is where they squeeze it. You know, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and then there's a gap of millions or even billions of years, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. But it says the first creative act refers to the dateless past and gives scope for all the geologic ages. So that's what they were all being taught. And it says, earth made waste and empty by judgment before God's second creative act. It's like the second creative act? Again, this is the ruin reconstruction theory. They said there was in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and then there was this world that Satan and his demons were at that got flooded, and God judged it, and then he made another earth. And so why would they think that? It's in Genesis 1:28, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. So they have to fill up the earth again with people. That means there was people there before. But that's based on our modern translation of the word. Replenish today means to fill up or build up again. So fill it up again, replenish. That's what it means now, but it never used to mean that. In 1828, it just meant to fill. That's it, to fill. So if they got the definition of the word right, they won't need that pre-Adamic race that got judged before. Okay, so theistic evolution. We might as well define the terms. This is from Answers in Genesis, and they are not very supportive of theistic evolution, and you'll see that. It says, theistic evolution is the idea that God started or directed evolutionary processes. This view makes God a bumbling, incompetent creator and the author of death and suffering, as it puts them before mankind's sin. It calls into question the truth of God's word and his character as an all-powerful, loving God. And it goes on to say, Christians who adopt evolution are inconsistent. He didn't say they're not Christians. He didn't say they're not going to heaven. He said they're inconsistent. Why? Because they are accepting the foundation of the humanistic worldviews. Well, this is very interesting because Answers in Genesis does that too. Okay, let's just read this again. Christians who adopt evolution are inconsistent because they are accepting the foundation of the humanistic worldviews, such as evolution. Say that God used evolution, slap a cross on it, and call it theistic evolution. But they do the same thing with plate tectonics, which is a secular model. They speed it up, and they call it catastrophic plate tectonics. Okay, so they're doing the same thing. Essentially, they are telling God that they believe him when he told us about the virgin birth, crucifixion, and the resurrection of Christ, but they do not trust him when he tells about how he created the world. Okay, that's Answers in Genesis. Okay, well, Biologos, they promote theistic evolution. So I'll give you their perspective of it, because I like you to see both sides and then come to your own conclusion. Okay, theistic evolution, history and beliefs. Core tenets or assumptions of theistic evolution. God used the process of evolution to create living things, including humans. So the process of evolution. Now this is Cliff Connectley. I have a lot of respect for him. He has been preaching on campuses for 45 years. And you can see him on YouTube. He's really good at it. Really, really, really good. But I disagree with him on a couple of these issues.
No geology, no biology, no chemistry, no physics, anywhere in the Bible. So whoever tells you Bible contradicts science, either haven't read the Bible or they don't know what science is. So that is why Stuart and I are totally open to evolution as a process, but not as an origin. The Bible does contradict evolution as an origin, but not as a process. The Bible clearly says, in the beginning, God, not in the beginning, hydrogen. In other words, there's an intelligent mind behind the process of evolution that makes much more sense than there's no intelligent mind behind the process.
Well, yeah, I agree there's an intelligent mind, but I disagree when he says the Bible doesn't talk about geology. Of course it does. It talks about Noah's flood. And that's how you get layers of sedimentary rock worldwide full of fossils laid down by the water. What does Ken Ham say? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. That's geology. This world was flooded, and you can see signs of that, and you're going to see that tomorrow night if you watch the debate. No biology, sure, it talks about biology. You know, in chapter 1, how many times does it say they produce after their kind, the seed is in itself? Those are biological statements. The framework for geology is a worldwide flood. The framework for biology is they were created and they produce after their kind. And then you can also use that for anthropology and astronomy also. And then that says the Bible doesn't contradict evolution as a process. Well, I beg to differ, because if evolution needs a whole lot of time, which is what they need to make all those little changes to turn something into something else, the Bible clearly contradicts that. I mean, in Genesis chapter 1, you go down in verse 5, it says, in the evening and the morning were the first day. In verse 8, the second day. And then verse 11, and he's talking about the plants that'll produce after his kind, whose seed is in itself, after his kind. And that was the third day. And then it says the fourth day. And God created great whales and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. Well, when was that? The fifth day. These aren't evolving. These are days. And then it says, and God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God made man in his own image. And when was that? He tells us, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. That's a key word right there, very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So the first day, the second day, on and on. I've got a hunch that he's not reading a King James Bible. Because in the King James Bible, it says the first day, the second day. But what does the NASB say? It says one day. How many the first days have there been? One. How many one days have there been? All of them. And this is, let's see, the RSV says one, and then this is ASV says one day. And as long as we're talking about Bibles, can anybody read Acts 8:37 here? You see how it goes from 36 and then it goes to 38? It's just gone. I showed that to a student at St. Cloud State, and he goes, dude, he just couldn't believe it. But yeah, it's missing there. It's got F, then there's a little footnote. And you go into the Blue Letter Bible, ESV says, see the footnotes. What is missing? It says when the Ethiopian eunuch asks Philip, what doth hinder me to be baptized? And Philip said, if thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So that's basically, I look at it, that's what you should do to be baptized. Oh, and here's another verse. This is Matthew 17:21. Howbeit this kind goes not out but by prayer and fasting. This is when the disciples weren't able to cast out that devil out of the person. And they asked Jesus, why not? And he basically says, howbeit, you have to pray and fast. That's a key verse if you want to cast out demons. But guess what's missing? In the NIV. And a lot of them, they take that verse out. And the reason I show you that is because the guy who flew me down to Houston, that's one of his ministries, is to save troubled marriages. These are on the brink of divorce, just horrible marriages. And that's the verse. You'll say, well, have you tried everything? Yeah, we've tried everything. Well, have you tried praying and fasting? And they haven't. And so this is a key verse, and he's had some success doing that. Okay, and another verse, Matthew 18:11, for the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. And guess what's missing in the NIV? It's gone. And I should have brought them. I got a stack of paper about all the missing verses. Okay, back on topic here. This is back to Bio Logos, talking about theistic evolution. The Bible is not a reliable source of scientific knowledge about the origin of the earth and the universe, including living people. Okay, and it says the Bible is a reliable source of knowledge about God and spiritual things, and scientific evidence is irrelevant to the Bible. And the creation story in Genesis 1 is a confession of faith in the true creator intended to refute pantheism and polytheism, not to tell us how God actually created the world. So that's what they're doing. And then number 5, it says that the Bible tells us that God created, not how God created. And I don't know how they get that. But that's biologos. Those are the tenets of theistic evolution. And I was talking to somebody, their youth group had just gone through Genesis. And I said, well, they talk about creation? And he said, not really. They just went through Genesis as they talked about, they were looking at the attributes of God. Not so much about what he is, not so much what he did. And I think that's a mistake. I think if he's told us what he did, we should look at what he did. And here is a Gallup poll. You may have seen this. But for 20 years now, they've been asking these same questions in the same order. Which of the following statements comes closest to your views on the origin and development of human beings? Number one, human beings have developed over millions of years from less advanced forms of life, but God guided this process. That's the middle line. That's 34%. It's been staying between 30 and 40% for 40 years. Number two, human beings have developed over millions of years from less advanced forms of life, but God had no part in this process. This is atheistic blind chance. This is blind chance evolution. This is based on blind chance. That's the bottom one. But notice 40 years ago when I was a kid, 1 in 10 people believed it. But now that I'm not a kid, 1 in 4 believe it. And look, that's a troubling statistic. And then number 3, God created human beings pretty much in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years or so. That's creation. And that's the majority of Americans. They're taking the majority as taxpayer to teach a minority view. And as a taxpayer, I'm not happy about that. Okay, and then you just look, and since the last study in 2019, the creationists lost 3, the theistic evolutionists gained 1, and the evolutionists gained 2. But take a bigger sample, go back 12 years, the creationists have lost 9, and the theistic evolutionists have gained 2. But look at the evolutionists, the blind chancers. They've gained 9. So if we extrapolate this same trend, creationists are going to be in the bottom in 12 years. And it won't be long, and the blind chancers will be on top. And this is kind of similar to what I find at St. Cloud State. You know, this is Evolution 1, 46 to 44. Okay, but keep in mind, this is a secular college. I figured it'd be a landslide. You know, 100 to 10 is what I was expecting, but it's very close. In spite of all the billions of dollars and all the generations of propaganda that they've been pushing on people, the people aren't believing it. And when I'm at St. Cloud State, sometimes they ask, well, what are you doing here? And I said, I just want to give you an opportunity to think. You need to see both sides if you want to think. But, you know, it's like, but you're getting a blind chance perspective rammed down your throat with the Big Bang and evolution. And I said, like that building, you think the building got put together by chance? That'd be absurd, right? And they say, yeah. But if that's all you see, you just memorize, you don't think. So I'm giving you a creation perspective. You know, if that building couldn't get together by chance, how could our bodies get put together by chance? So then I introduce them to that. And this is at the St. Cloud Tech College. And that one ended up 49 for creation, 21 for evolution, and 17 for theistic evolution. So creationists are the majority at the St. Cloud Technical School. Okay, and I was at another college, and that's how'd we get here? Creation, evolution, or intelligent design. And creation won 16 to 6 that day. And when they stroke on evolution, I'll ask them, well, how did life begin? And they'll say, you know, think scientists have done it. It's like, no, they haven't. Go into evo2.org, $10 million, evo2.org, $10 million. All you have to do is show how the DNA got inside a cell and organized itself. 10 million. So scientists don't know how to do it. Okay. And then one time a guy, he stroked under creation, and I asked him, well, why did you put it there? And he said, well, that's where everybody else is stroking. And so I had heard about this principle, how there's 15 to 20% of the people that they'll never, on any issue, you'll never change their mind. But the middle 60 to 70%, you're going to, that's who you want to work with. And so that's what we did there. That's what we need. We need to have more people on the creation path than the blind chance path. This was in Pennsylvania at Penn State Altoona campus. Evolution 1, 17 to 13. But again, it's pretty close. And then this is the University of Illinois, Chicago. And Evolution 1, 18 to 10. And then Theistic Evolution at 9. But the don't knows, they could sway either one of them to be the majority. And I think if you give people an opportunity to see the creation model, they're going to come down on creation. And then a few years ago, anybody go to that Celebrate Minnesota thing? Anybody? Bill? Okay, yeah. There was a businessman had speakers and Christian bands come in. And I had a table and asked them, when did dinosaurs live? Millions of years ago or thousands? and millions won, 81 to 51. And this is a mainly Christian crowd. So that shows us that our churches are doing a terrible job on explaining dinosaurs with the Bible. So for those who haven't heard it, dinosaurs were land animals, so they were made on day 6 with all the other land animals. 2 of every kind of dinosaur got on the ark. They were young, so they could still fit. The flood came and killed all the rest of them, and some of them turned into fossils. And then they got off the ark, and people called them dragons. And they killed them. And they carved them in castles and temples and canyons. So that's the biblical interpretation. But I went to Bethel. That's a Christian university. Millions of years won there too. So that shows us there's something wrong with our seminaries. There's something wrong with our churches, and that's what I'm trying to help fix. And as long as I'm there, I was at the St. Cloud State in their science building. They had some tables, so I set up errors in the textbook table, and the homeschoolers were coming by, and a professor comes by, and he said, I think God did the Big Bang. God did the Big Bang. And so I asked him, do you teach that in class? He says, no, can't do that. So a good question to ask your professor is, do you believe what you're telling us? Or are you just doing this for a paycheck? You know, and then eventually those tables were no longer there anymore for some reason. And going back to that Gallup poll, you know, creation is in green. And if you go to church once a week, 61% of you are going to believe in creation, which means 49% of the people who go to church every Sunday are still confused on this issue. And a lot of churches, they don't touch it. And then this is Protestants. If you have a religion, 51% of Protestants believe in creation, but half of them don't. 49% don't believe in creation. And they believe in some form of theistic evolution. So we got to work on that. And now this would make sense. Catholics, most of them believe in theistic evolution because I think that's what they stand on. And they certainly don't stand against it. I know somebody who graduated from Cathedral, and I asked him, you know, do they teach evolution at Cathedral? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what do they teach in Bible class? And he says, well, in religion class, they teach creation. So I asked him, which one's true? And he said, well, it depends on which class I'm in. So what they taught him was, hey, you determine what's truth. And so then later on, he determined it was okay to live with somebody. When I said, hey, you should really marry her. And he goes, yeah, I sure really should. I hope he did. Okay, and then this one, if you don't have a religion, what are you going to be? Atheist. Are you going to be an evolutionist? A blind chancer? Well, why is that? Because it's everywhere. It's in all these textbooks. This is St. Cloud, Sauk Rapids, Cold Spring. I went through all of them, and there's evolution just oozing out of them. They got a whole unit on evolution, and all those arrows have evolution. So, of course, if you don't see a creation model, that's what you're going to think. It's just by default. But if you go to college, now you're less likely to be a creationist. You know, I've heard some horror stories about even seminaries. You know, people send their kids off to seminaries, and those kids turn their back on God and run as far as they can. You know, was it Pastor Lee? He told me that seminaries are where red-hot Christians go to die. And sometimes that happens. But what happened to Charles Templeton when he went to seminary? He's a former evangelist alongside Billy Graham, embraced evolutionary history over millions of years while attending Princeton Theological Seminary. He died in unbelief. It says, Templeton denies faith. Famed Christian evangelist accepts evolution, becomes atheist evangelist. Okay, and he wrote Farewell to God, and he says, it's simply not possible any longer to believe, for instance, the biblical account of creation. The world wasn't created over a period of days a few thousand years ago. It has evolved over millions of years. It's not a matter of speculation. It's demonstrable fact. It's like, what? Demonstratable? Okay, bring it on. Let me see a molecule turn into a man. I want to see it this time. You know, let's see an amoeba turn into an elephant or bacteria into a blue whale. I want to see it. It's not observable. It's just a story. Here's some stats from ReachRight. 40 church statistics every leader should know. 2026. Look at who's not going to church. Look at that trend. This is in 20 years. The people who never attended church was down at the bottom, and now it's up at 33%. Now it's the biggest segment. Okay, and the ones who go weekly, that's dropped. You know, pretty close to almost in half. So that's what the trends are here in America. And the way you read this one is in the U.S., 73% of people raised Christian are still Christian. So what does that tell us? 27% of those raised Christian are not Christian. It's not that they're not going to church, it's that they've turned their back on Jesus. They have disavowed Christianity, and that's startling. Church closures have outpaced openings for the first time. And Ken Ham, wrote this book, Already Gone, Why Your Kids Will Quit Church and What You Can Do to Stop It. And they made 20,000 calls so they could survey 1,000 conservative church kids, because they figured this is as good as it gets. And found 61% of them stopped going to church when they're in their 20s. And they asked them, why'd you stop? And the main reason was they doubted the Bible. And they asked them, well, when? When did you start to doubt the Bible? And 40% in middle school, that's when the Big Bang's being taught as dogma. 44% in high school when evolution's being taught as dogma. And then 11% in college. And the book goes on to say, if you went to Sunday school, you were more likely to stop attending church. Because some of those Sunday schools are teaching some form of evolution, which basically say God didn't do what he said, or he didn't mean what he said. And so that's troubling. If we could get the churches to just start teaching creation, I think we'd have a chance. Okay, 10 years later, the church dropouts have risen to 64%. So the trend is continuing. And this is, let's see, a Gallup poll again. These are for people that go weekly. 20-some years ago, it was 42%. Now it's 30%. So the trend is continuing. And this one's from Christian Today. It says, when asked why they stopped identifying with their faith tradition, they had simply stopped believing the teaching of their church. So they are looking to the church instead of the Bible to teach them. And I think that's another area where we can improve. And this one says 20% of young adults dislike the sermon, citing a lack of depth or connection to real life. Well, just think if you could take the Bible and connect it to their biology class, to their geology class, to their history class, to their anthropology class. It would make it come alive. I remember when that happened to me. You know, when the very first time I was almost 40, somebody sent me a VHS tape, and it changed my life. First time I ever heard that fossils, were a sign of a flood, and evolution's based on millions of years. And now it's so much easier for us. We can just send them a link. So easy for us to spread this word instead of putting it and packaging it up and recording and stuff. Okay, and so why are the kids confused? I think it's because the seminaries are confused. Ken Ham wrote another book, Already Compromised. Christian colleges took a test on the state of their faith, and the final exam is in. And so what they contacted 200 Christian colleges and universities, and they wanted to survey the president and the deans of the academic science and theology. And they were able to do 312 surveys. And this is what they found. They found 23% do not believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. 39% do not believe in a 24-hour day creation. 43% do not believe in a worldwide flood. And 49% believe the earth is billions of years old. Okay, so let's talk about that. The students, the Bible says that all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered with water. Forget about it. It's not a worldwide flood. It's a local flood. So they're starting to redefine, and day, that's millions of years, redefine the terms. And once you open that door to one generation, they'll just kick it down. It'll keep getting worse and worse and worse. It's like, well, if God didn't mean what he said about creation, maybe he didn't mean what he said about marriage. Maybe he didn't mean what he said about gender. Maybe he didn't mean what he said about salvation. And it reminds me of, on Sunday I was talking to a sophomore in high school. He has 2 jobs. I thought, good for you. You're a good worker. And I said, what are you saving up for? He goes, nothing really. I said, do you just spend it all? He goes, yeah. And I should have said, well, start saving it. Just think if you save 10% of every check you ever made, just think how much money you'd have. And he also said he had a car, and his dad said, well, if you do something to make the insurance rates go up, you have to pay. And if you get in an accident, you have to pay. And I said, you must be a pretty cautious driver. He said, yeah, but I still go 90 and a 60. He goes, it doesn't stop me from going 90 and a 60. It's like, whoa. And then somebody said, yeah, they could take your license for that. But my guess is his dad speeds. If you show him it's okay to speed, well, where's the line? And just think, we're supposed to obey all the ordinances of man. Just think if all the Christians drove the speed limit. Because the faster you go, the less mileage you get. Now with $4 gas, that might be a consideration. And so anyhow, and then it says 10% teach evolution as true. Let's take a look at that. This is Baylor University. I went into their website, and it says and this is their science website. Evolution, a foundational principle of modern biology, well, I would dispute that, is supported by overwhelming scientific evidence and is accepted by the vast majority of scientists. What is wrong with that sense? Let me count the ways. One, it's not the foundational principle. And overwhelming evidence, no, it's not. It's a bunch of imagination. And then scientific evidence, science is observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable, double-blind, high-confidence science. Evolution is none of that. And then it goes on to say, accepted by the vast majority of scientists. Well, the majority of scientists have been wrong a lot. I could do a whole talk on that. That's the appeal to authority. And then it says, the faculty in the biology department at Baylor University teach evolution throughout the biology curriculum. And it says, we are a science department, so we do not teach alternative hypotheses or philosophically deduced theories that cannot be tested rigorously. So they're just going to push one theory. And so kids just memorize. You need to see two theories if you want to think. And so let's see what their purpose is. What's their mission? They want to heal our world. It says, we are dedicated to the overarching purpose of sharing the gospel and saving souls. Is that what they're all about? Looking at creation? No, not at all. Overarching purpose of improving lives through teaching and research and address worldwide challenges in human health and environmental stewardship. So it seems like they're focusing on the creation more than the creator. And Romans 1 kind of warns us about that. And I was beginning to think, is this the Baylor? Is this Christian? And I had to search around before I could find Jesus. You notice there's no reference to Jesus or the Bible. And so Jesus said, if I have told you earthly things and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of heavenly things? All right. And this is BYU. There's a lot of theological differences there, but they endorse evolution also. They'll officially incorporate biological evolution into the life science curriculum. So they're taking that blind chance perspective and they're teaching it as dogma. And it reminds me of in the garden, the serpent was subtle and he says, yea, hath God said. And you got the, does day mean day, day mean day, or is that long periods of time, gap theory, theistic evolution, all those things are making a pretzel out of what God clearly said. And I might have told you about that interview on Louisiana, where a caller called in and asked, does the Bible say that man came from the dust of the earth? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that's what evolution teaches. Man came from the dust of the earth. And God was just communicating to an ignorant people. They couldn't understand, this. They weren't sophisticated enough to understand evolution. So God dumbed it down for them. Man came from the dust of the earth. That's just an analogy. And so then I said, well, the Bible also says the first woman came from the first man's rib. How does that fit into the analogy? It doesn't. It doesn't. But people try and say Genesis is poetic or framework or all these things. It's like, okay, well, let's just not do Genesis. How about Exodus? Can we take that as it is written? Or more specifically, the 10 Commandments? Or can we twist those words up? And then most people agree, no, the 10 Commandments, that's pretty much the way it is. Well, right smack dab in the middle of the 10 Commandments, in Exodus 20:11, it said, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them is, and rested the seventh day. So God clearly said he wrote it with his own finger, 6 days. Who are we to question that? This isn't a matter of what God could have done. It's a matter of what God said he did. And the real question that people have is, are you going to believe what God said? It's a simple question. 6 days or not? And a woman, she found out I gave these talks, and she goes, well, what side are you on? And I said, creation. How about you? And she said, can I say both? It's like, no, you can't. Because there are so many things that are backwards. Two opposing things can't be true at the same time in the same way. This podium can't be in this room and out of this room at the same time in the same way. Similarly, you can't have the earth before the sun and the sun before the earth. You can't have that. You can't believe those at the same time. You can't have the earth formed underwater and the earth being a hot molten blob, because that's going to evaporate everything. And then you can't have sin before death and death before sin. That's the theistic evolutionists' major problem. They have a theological problem. If they believe in millions and billions of years of death and suffering before Adam got here, it's not Adam's fault that there's death here. And so there's a big problem, and you can go on and on. Another one, the Bible says there's a global flood. A lot of those theistic evolutionists, they have that millions of years. They got to have that geologic column, and then you got no global flood. Okay, so there's problems with that. Okay, and then I was going to speak in Nebraska. And I was going to speak at a school and to some pastor groups, and I asked the person, "Oh, can you have some questions so I can hit what they're curious in?" And I figured I'd get a bunch from the students, but there's somebody, must have been a pastor. He said, "Well, what do you think about the concordance interpretation of Genesis?" It's like, I've never heard of it. So I had to do some research. And concordance interpretation, that's matter. God made the earth using the sequence of events described in Genesis 1. So they're hooking the science to the Bible. The non-concordance one is God created the earth using a different timing and order of events than those described in Genesis 1. So those are different. They don't connect the Bible and science. Those are totally different. One can say one thing and it doesn't matter. So let's take a look at these. And I'm just doing this so you know the basic confusion that's out there. The young earth interpretation, creation occurred about 6,000 years ago during 6 24-hour days in the order described. A scientific study of the earth should confirm this. And it does. That's what I am, all right? But the gap interpretation, the earth was created long ago, became formless and empty, and was restored about 6,000 years ago during 6 24-hour days. I don't go along with that one. And then the day-age interpretation, creation occurred over billions of years. Each day of Genesis corresponds to a long epoch. Events occurred in the order given in the text, but stretched out over a long period of time. And that's what a co-host said. Well, couldn't each day be millions of years? And I asked him, well, what verse in the Bible causes you to think that? And even if it was, could the plants made on day 3 live millions of years without the sun on day 4? And even if they could do that, could they live millions or billions of years without something to pollinate them? And it occurred to me, could they live even millions of more years without animals to give them carbon dioxide? See, plants need carbon dioxide. And if there's nothing giving them carbon dioxide, what's going to happen to them? Okay, and then this one, the appearance of age interpretation. Creation occurred about 6,000 years ago during 6 24-hour days, but it was created to look like it had a long history of billions of years. See, now, I don't hear that one much, and it would make God out to be deceptive. So I don't really go along with that, or any of them really, besides the first one. Okay, this is the non-concordist interpretation. And this is where that does not necessarily seek to reconcile them, and they're just two totally different things. The proclamation day interpretation, the days of Genesis 1 took place in God's throne room, wherein God proclaimed each step of creation. The throne room days are not related to days or time periods on earth. So you got to use a lot of imagination here. The creation poem interpretation, the number and ordering of the days of creation of Genesis 1 are chosen for poetic and thematic reasons rather than historical reasons. And then the kingdom and temple interpretation, as the great king, God gives human dominion as a land grant covenant. Alternatively, God inaugurates the cosmos as his temple. In both cases, the text is not focused on the physical universe. And I think it would be kind of hard to find biblical scripture to support this. And then the Near East cosmology's interpretation. Now, this one seems to be gaining steam, gaining traction. And it's by John Walton. It says, Genesis 1 matches the physical picture of the world believed in ancient Near East religions, but presents a dramatically different theological picture, proclaiming one God as a creator of all rather than many gods. Okay? And this, I don't know if you'll be able to understand this one, but we'll give it a try.
Genesis 1, he argues, only makes reference to function and order in the world, not to material creation. We should be deeply concerned. The implication of Walton's mythology is that because the beliefs are deeply held, untruth can be employed to convey, explain, and justify them. Truths that are conveyed by untruths, they're not true. They are not expressed in God's framework. They are not seen as God sees them. They are by their very nature perversions of truth.
But basically, he says, they're using the Babylonians to interpret the Bible. And he says, go to the Babylonians, instead of search the scriptures. And he says that if it's based on falsehoods, it's false.
Book of Job, when God asks, where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Well, go to the Babylonians, Walton declares, as if answering God's question to Job, arguing that there was no one present at creation to give a creation account. According to Walton, the only one there was the snake, and he didn't write anything. End of quote. How wrong can you be?
And so, yeah, you can see clips of that at the Twin Cities Creation Science Association. That guy's name was Michael Drake, and you can see the highlights in the highlights section. But the key verse for all of those, and I just want to make it simple, you don't have to know everything about all of them, what they believe. Just give them this verse. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female, because they all believe in long ages. So you just throw this one out there. And notice Jesus is a creationist, the beginning of the creation. So Jesus is a creationist, and he's a young earth creationist. Notice the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female, not millions or billions of years later. So let's take a look at a timeline. Here's the biblical timeline. You got creation roughly 6,000 years ago, and there's a flood 4,400 years ago, and then Jesus 2,000 years ago, and then here we are today. Okay, the blind chance timeline, evolution, you got the Big Bang billions of years ago, Earth billions of years ago, life billions of years ago, plants and animals millions of years ago, and then people got there at the end. Okay, and where did people get here on the biblical timeline? At the beginning. And people ask me, well, which one do you believe? They say, I just agree with Jesus. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. And Jesus is our example. If we're not using that example, we're on real thin ice. And so, it's young earth. It was right there. And he always referred to Genesis as accurate historical events. He wasn't trying to squeeze millions of years in there. Okay, and then he also validates Genesis 1 and 2 in Mark 10:6. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And so they made one flesh. Therefore shall man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So he's quoting from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, validating each of them as an accurate historical event. And that's what I think we should be doing. Okay, and then the theistic evolution, I'll just give you some highlights from this article. And this is from creation.com. Okay, if you're a day age person or a theistic evolution, the days of Genesis 1 and Exodus 20:11 were long periods of time, millions or even billions of years, or they don't even represent time span at all. So that's not very solid. And then this is the theological one. You got death and bloodshed long before Adam, if he even existed. That's the problem. That's the real theological problem for any theistic evolutionist or long ager. And how will he be able to give us new incorruptible bodies in a twinkling of an eye? If you believe he could do that, why would he need millions of years to get us here? And then death is the last enemy. This isn't a creative force. Death is not our friend. It's an enemy. He's not going to use an enemy to create us. And if God needed billions of years to create the first heavens and the first earth, how long will it take to make new ones? It's just really inconsistent. And if God used evolution in the past, will he use it in the future? It doesn't make sense. And if death entered the world on a specific day in the past, it can be abolished within a day in the future. But if it's always been here, and then it goes on to say, when it comes to origins, Father God plus Mother Earth equals an illegitimate child. Theistic evolution. So we don't have to try and squeeze that in there. And here's theistic evolution. What difference does it make? They get 25 points, but I'll just give you a couple of them. Man, the creature uniquely made in his own image and likeness, indeed so special was man that God gave him prince-like authority over all nature. Okay, here we see the wisdom, goodness, and power of God, as well as the dignity and uniqueness of man in the creation. But theistic evolution and so-called progressive creationism undermines all of this. It denies the plain biblical chronology and sequence of God's creative acts. Even more seriously, it attacks the very character of God, identifying his creative activity with the violent, painful, deadly, and purposeless course of evolution. Theistic evolution also subtly undermines the dignity and sanctity of human life by transforming the prince of creation into a virtual afterthought in the creation process. And it says, compromise with evolution almost inevitably leads to a denial both of the historicity of Adam and his ruinous fall. Evolutionism clearly undermines the first Adam, but what is the effect on the last Adam, Jesus Christ, whose very mission, according to Scripture, was to undo what the first Adam had so disastrously done? Okay, and this guy, I kind of like his question and the answer here.
Can Christians believe in evolution and the Bible?
You can believe in the Bible and little green men on Mars or fairies at the bottom of the garden, but you won't get those ideas from the Bible. That's the problem. Evolutionary ideas come from a non-Christian worldview that says there was millions of years of death and struggle in the world. And if we add those two things together, I would suggest that makes God a cruel creator.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. And this is Dr. Jerry Bergman. He's got 1,200 articles and books printed, just phenomenal. And somebody asks him about theistic evolution.
What could we say to fellow believers who say God created through evolution?
Yeah, that's the most common comment I get, because people commonly believe that, because I can believe both science and the Bible. The problem is neither science nor the Bible teaches theistic evolution. And the problem is, let's prove evolution first, then let's try to harmonize it with the Bible. And the problem is, clearly, evolution is the doorway to atheism.
Yep, and he wrote a book called that. Darwinism is the doorway to atheism, but conversely, science is the doorway to the creator. And he's got examples of each of those. And so, just to summarize, what you taught when you meet these old earthers who say they believe in the Bible, just give them these verses. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is. That's Exodus 20:11. And then John 3:12. If I have told you earthly things and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of heavenly things? And then this is the really key verse. At Northwestern, there was an old earther we talked for probably an hour. This is a verse he really struggled with. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. And so that's our talk on theistic evolution. I mean, we want you to get all the information to make informed decisions, but that's more than just in creation. There's some things out there. There's a dominant mindset out there. I just want to give you another way of looking at things. Thomas Massey, a 7-time incumbent, he got beat on Tuesday by somebody that was funded like crazy by Miriam Adelson and people in the Epstein list. And there's a lot of things that really don't add up. And if you go into Ron Paul's Liberty Report, and did Massey lose or was he pushed, they cover some of this stuff. It kind of reminds me of 2020 when Biden didn't campaign, he didn't debate, and yet he won with a record number of votes. Same thing here. This guy didn't debate. There was 8 scheduled debates. He didn't show up for any of them. And when he did speak publicly, he said that he wants to institute a draft. And who's going to vote for that? And yet more votes than ever showed up, and he actually won. And then this is the Baron Coleman. He gave the best analysis of the Charlie Kirk assassination that I've seen. He had a timeline, and it starts at about the 55-minute mark of episode 112. And he goes through all these things, and when he gets done, he says, and that's why they killed him. And when you look at it, it's hard to dispute it. So I encourage you to go, don't believe it just because I say it, but look at what the facts are on the timeline. And then also, how many people knew that 13 American bases around Iran were destroyed? Who knew that? Okay, John knew that. Yeah, and this came out on March 26th, almost a month after the war started. I knew that the first week. I knew that the government, who trusts the government? Who trusts the media anymore? What have they done to be trustworthy? So I don't watch any mainstream, but I go to people who haven't lied to me in the past. And this is Judge Napolitano. He's got good insights. He has good guys got interviews, and they've been right this whole time. They've been 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time. What I'm waiting for is when they declassify how many deaths there have been, the casualties. Those are classified after the first day. Okay, so you're getting a picture painted one way, another picture painted the other way. This is Bahala. He was a former Green Beret, and he still has friends in there. So he kind of has the inside scoop a little bit. And he understands what it's going to take if we try and take Karg Island. He understands that there's no support, and it's going to be a suicide mission. And it's interesting to see his perspective of the war. And for the most part, he's been right on. But he's talking about how Trump's most insane corruption scandal yet. Did you hear about in the settlement, Trump and his family can never be audited by the IRS? And they also got $1.8 billion. Yeah, very interesting. And it's just stunning to see what's happening. And then this is Ian Carroll. And the ballroom, I should have brought that clip. But anyhow, the ballroom is on top of, basically they think it's going to be a data center. Under the White House, there's no congressional oversight. So that's a lot of power that nobody's watching over. And then he says, hey, what if a foreign government links into it? What if a foreign government is building it? It could be very devastating. And these data centers are popping up like dandelions all over the place. and they use a lot of water. They can use as much energy as a small state or a big city. A city of 50,000 of water and energy is what they can use. You know, in Utah, it's going to be the whole state. Yeah, and what they're doing now, and it's just, you know, what they're planning, it's like, hey, what happened to global warming? I thought we were supposed to start reducing our energy consumption, but it's rules for thee, but not for me. And they can, remember eminent domain, that's so you could use it for the public good? Well, they changed that. Now they can use it to give it to a private company. And so that's what's happening in America. And we need to have them so China doesn't beat us. Well, where's China on this thing? We got 5 or 10 times more than everybody else. We got more than all the other ones, so that we have to beat China. I don't know if China's racing real hard at this, but I look at those surveillance things as, could they be used to, you know, those data centers as surveillance things? You know, why do they need so many of them? And then this, you know, nearly 50,000 Lake Tahoe residents have to find a new power source after their energy source looks to redirect lines to data centers. How would you like that? You know, these data centers, and why are they there? If they are AI, they're going to take a lot of jobs. Why do we need them? And now states are starting to push back. This will be an election topic, and it should be. They want to put one in Utah that's 60 square miles. Yeah, it's bigger than twice the size of Manhattan, and it's going to use more energy than the entire state. And so why do we need that? And then, so what?
It's already been approved to be built.
Well, yeah, the 3 government agencies, you know, the 3 bureaucrats got whatever, they voted for it. The people didn't. There was 4,000 people opposing it, and yet they still passed it. And if you want to know about the health risks and stuff, Maria Z, she's been pretty good through COVID. I just stumbled across her again. What they don't want you to know about data centers and how they're reducing the environmental impacts and the health consequences. And Tom Rentz, he's really good researcher. He's a lawyer. He talked about that too. So with all that, this is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. You know, there are some things that are going sideways in America, but I think people are waking up. And I just want you, again, don't believe it because I say so, but check out some of these sources. You know, we want to know if the bases are uninhabited. And then again, from the Theistic Evolution, this verse, 10:6, Mark 10:6. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. And I really like this. Sometimes I wake up at night and I have to remember this. It's like, if you look at the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. But if you look at Christ, you'll be at rest. And so if we are Christians, the worst thing that can happen is we go to heaven. We just want to get more people to go to heaven by putting their faith in Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross. Okay, so thank you so much. I appreciate the attention. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Well, I've been thinking about these data centers.
Good.
And I don't know what they're all about, but I've got a guess. And it seems to me that if they're data centers, they're collecting all our data. They're going to tie in with the banking system. And pretty soon they will be set up, maybe they already are, so that they can shut down our bank accounts and our ability to buy or sell if we don't do exactly what they say. And I suspect that that's what it's about. Any opinion on that?
I would tend to agree with everything you said. I would. You know, like in China, if you criticize the government, you know, they can shut off your transportation. You can't get on the subway, you know, and now even in America, if you post something, you could have the FBI come into your door. You know, instead of prosecuting, going after the Epstein list, they're going after people that say the wrong thing. And that's what we have to watch out for. We have to make sure that we keep our freedom to speak, which makes sure that allows us the freedom to think. But if they censor our speech, then yeah, that's where we have to be aware of this.
Christians really have to be prepared that the marks of the beast might be just around the corner. And what are we going to do? Are we going to be willing to die rather than take whatever mark it is? And I don't know what exactly it is, but I think it's going to be tied in with these data centers. And you agree?
Absolutely.
What kind of timeline do they want this all in place? because, you know, during COVID, they were talking about 2030, like the World Economic Forum, that all this stuff was supposed to be 2030. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. You know, that you won't eat meat. And now they got the ticks out there. I just listened to the High Wire, you know, the ticks that give you some allergy to meat, you know, and it sounds like they're dropping them out of planes maybe. So, yeah, I don't, and like you said, are you going to be willing to die? And I don't know if anybody knows until they're in that spot, you know, until you're in that situation.
Pray for discernment, because I think it's going to be more deceptive than what most Christians were expecting. I don't think it's going to be as simple as sign here and say that you renounce God and renounce Jesus, and then you can buy and sell. I think it's going to be a lot more subtle. And I think we have to, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think we have to pray for discernment that we're going to recognize this market of beast.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Have understanding of the times, like the children of Issachar. And yeah,
Any churches preaching this? There aren't, are there? That is unbelievable to me.
I know a couple that give me the microphone and they allow me, you know, and I'll be there next month or two. But yeah, there is a handful of pastors that see what's happening and they will say something. You know, when Waltz told him said everybody has to shut down, he sent him a letter and says, you have no authority to tell us what to do. And so then Ellison got on a Zoom call with all the surrounding pastors and turned them all against this pastor. And he told me, you have no idea the number of Marxist pastors out there. Yeah. But I did hear one that during COVID, he was saying this is not some isolated event with COVID and the border and transgender and all that stuff. He said, these are all heads of the same snake, Marxism. There's a Marxist takeover happening. And I give him a lot of credit for that. So yeah, the pastors that will stand up and speak. And yet there's other pastors that say, hey, don't talk about it, you know? And that's not how we're going to be ready. That's not how we're going to be discerned, to have discernment if we can't talk about it with our Christian brothers and sisters, you know? And so, yeah, you bring up a good point. And I look at it, you know, they just might, you know, you can't, this is the currency. Hopefully there's going to be a black market where you can still buy without the mark. But yeah, it's...
I think that's what some people were hoping cryptocurrency would be.
Yeah.
But now cryptocurrency is backed by the US dollar.
Yeah.
And it's going to be backed by the whole government. And so it will be tied in with the banking system and with artificial intelligence. It's all moving in that direction.
It is. And what's going to happen if the petrodollar isn't the world currency anymore, because they're buying their oil in Chinese currency? And I think Iran is a lot more formidable than what they're saying. You know, if we could open the strait, we would have opened the strait by now. We can't. Okay.
Why can't we?
Well, it's the drones. I think that sounds like that our ships can't get within 200 miles or they can get hit. And then they got, you know, like the first week they took out, and they told America, you know, after that Operation Midnight Hammer last June, which obliterated their nuclear capabilities. So were they lying to us then, or were they lying to us in February? You know, and that's a whole nother topic. But they said, if you do it again, we're going to destroy your bases and we're going to close the strait. And we did it again during negotiations. Hey, we'll see you Monday. And then on Saturday, they bombed the kids' school and assassinate a leader who didn't want to bomb. So there's all this smoke and mirrors going on. And yeah, we're going to destroy the bases. And what they also did is they destroyed the radar. So then Israel's the Iron Dome didn't work because they couldn't see the missiles coming up. And then, you know, so they didn't have the warnings that they used to have. And so then they took the radar from South Korea and they brought it there, not to protect the Gulf states, but to protect Israel. So it's interesting to see the decisions that are being made that don't benefit America. And what is it? Trump has a 99% approval rate in Israel, but he's the American president and it's a 30%, 35%.
So is he working for Israel, or are they both working for somebody higher?
Baron Coleman, they said, who's in charge? And he says, I think it's Satan.
Right.
I think it's Satan. The things that they're doing, you know. And you look at, because Charlie Kirk, he did not want this war with Iran. Not at all. He spoke vehement. And he went to Trump in June. He said, don't do it. The base doesn't want it. The kids don't, we don't want another war. Don't do it. But if you do, make it quick. And so it was quick. But he crossed some other powers, and that could be why they took him out.
He was going to do a tell-off in Minnesota.
Was he really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Really?
Charlie.
Was that his schedule?
Yeah.
What was he going to say?
I don't know what all he was going to say, but he was going to speak on everything, mostly tactics and stuff like that. He was going to give up the list.
Yes,
Wow.
he had it.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and he had just a week before he died. Apparently, rumor has it that Turning Point Action was missing $10 million. And so he was going to do a Doge audit. So he wanted a Doge audit. He wanted to get the Epstein files released, and he didn't want a war with Iran. And what is TPUSA doing? They didn't do the Doge audit, and they supported Massey's opponent. And yes. So TPUSA isn't grassroots anymore. There's chapters that are disassociating themselves from TPUSA.
Because they can see through it.
Yeah, it's more fun. It's more money driven now than it was. It was idea driven before, and now it's basically money driven, donor driven, because the money that Charlie refused, they're taking. Yeah, now apparently they're paying chapters not to close, So, yeah.
Are they taking money from Israel?
APAC? Oh, the donors. Yeah, there was one. And you can see it in the text stream. Like 2 days before Charlie was assassinated, he was saying, so-and-so just withheld $2 million because he invited Tucker Carlson to speak in December. He says, I should invite Candace. And then the responder was, and he says, they're bullying me. I'm not going to put up with this bullying me. It's given me no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause. And then the next day, Josh Hammer retweets a tweet from Trump from 2013. It said a public execution would settle this BS. And then that night, Charlie tweets, I think they're going to kill me. And then the next day they did. And even Vance, when he spoke in Georgia, he talked about how they killed Charlie. They. So there's a lot of stuff. It reminds me of JFK, a lot of cover up. And that's what that Baron Coleman, he thinks he's found a hole in the cover up. And that's on episode 112 too. And so.
Can you tell us what the hole is?
Yeah, he said that in the records, in some Bates number, whatever, because he looked through the papers for the pre-trial thing, it said that Tyler Robinson was Mirandized. You have the right to do this, right to do that, at 6:25 p.m. on like the 11th, I think. Okay. And then I think he messed up the plans. I think he was supposed to die in a shootout, but he didn't. And so he goes in there, and then everybody's scrambling. That's when the text messages come out, and that's, and he's saying there's no way he's going to be texting somebody if he's, using his right to remain silent. And they're trying to say it was Mirandized on the next day, but it doesn't make sense. And so he's an attorney, and he knows how these things work. And then he also said, he went through there, and it's like, hey, I thought you said that the parents were going to testify that he turned himself in, that you're going to have the grandpa testify that it was his gun. And the ballistics don't link that bullet to the gun. So they're going to use some outdated, unreliable test that they used with the JFK bullet.
So they really can't legally hold him like they are when there's no legitimate evidence, but they're doing it illegally.
Well, he's a suspect, I know. So that's what did they do? the defense team has been asking for all these evidence. Hey, give us the forensic evidence for these text messaging. Where was he when he said? When was it? You know, and it's like, then for the pretrial information, they just sent them a PDF of it. You know, it's like, no, we need the forensics of it. We need to know where and when. And so they were asking for all this stuff that they could have had half a year ago. And then at the last month, they gave them 600,000 files. Here you go. And they said, we need time to go through this. And they said, well, we'll just put a date on the calendar and we can move it. And so that's what they're doing. But they're going to allow cameras in there. And it seems like the only people that want to know who get to the bottom of this, it's not TPUSA, it's not Erica, you know, it's not the FBI. The FBI won't let Joe Kent look into it. It's Candace and Baron Coleman and Ian Carroll are just a few of the podcasters. They're diving in deep, and it's interesting listening to. And I haven't missed a Candace show since it happened. You know, it's very interesting to see, you know, what they do and what she does. And
well, does Robinson have a good attorney? Is he doing what he needs to do?
I think so. I was surprised. I thought they were just going to have, you know, and it sounded like somebody's TPUSA's cousin was on it. So, but it seems like they're actually putting up a defense. You know, I just hope he doesn't happen to Epstein himself. You know, that's about the only way I think they can get out of this. Oh, we can't try him, but they better try him. And maybe, I don't know. But now, yeah, who is it? Somebody's suing Candace. Brian Harple, he was the head security guy, is suing her for defamation or whatever. And she says, great, I've got subpoena power. I want to see these text messages. I want to see these videos. I want to see. And so now she's got the power of attorney to get that stuff. So that'll be interesting. Of course, she's getting sued next month by Brigitte Macron because, a foreign leader is suing somebody in America. So I don't know how she's always so happy, but, you know, it's like, where are the guys, you know? But anyhow, so those are some sources of information. Just check them out and then get all the information, because we're not getting it from our government. We're not getting it from our media, you know. And
how do you know who to believe?
If they don't lie to me, anybody who said safe and effective, I don't trust them. Anybody who said that, including the president, you know, anybody who protects pedophiles, I don't trust them. You know, if they want the Epstein files hidden, I don't trust them. Anybody who's taking money from AIPAC, you know, and again, it's the podcasters, it's the mainstream media they're bought and paid for, I think. And it's who you can't criticize tells you who's in charge. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, just look who did they want Massey to win or not? Massey wanted to release the Epstein files. Massey was against the war. But
So you think the election was rigged?
well, it's hard to imagine that somebody who didn't campaign and wants to have a draft got all these. The only
figure that his campaign spent more money than anybody has ever spent on a project.
Yeah, it's like $30 million for a seat in Kentucky.
So I suppose if you have enough money to persuade people.
Well, that's what it's looking like.
Right.
You know, and what I'd like to see is just have no political advertising, just have debates. You know, then they wouldn't be bought and we'd be informed. You know, and just have a debate every week.
Massey's opponent, I can't think of his name, didn't answer any questions except I support Trump.
Right.
We'll do what Trump wants.
Right.
Anything Trump wants, I'll do it. That was his only platform.
Yeah, and then a lot of his big donors were, you know, Adelson and some other guy who's in the Epstein file. You know, they have their vested interest not to get those released. We only got half of them. And it's interesting, around 9/11, those things haven't been released at all. So, yeah. But it shows, I mean, Tucker, I trust too. Tucker's had some good interviews. He interviewed Joe Kent. He interviewed Massey. You know, it's a really good. He just interviewed a pollster yesterday. Every Wednesday, I think he does it. And the pollster says MAGA's shot. You know, they're done.
What do you mean? In what way?
Well, people aren't going to vote to protect pedophiles. They aren't going to vote for more wars.
So MAGA is diminishing?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's a unforced error. They didn't have to do it. I mean, Trump, with his political savvy, he should have seen this coming. So it makes me wonder if he's compromised, because it looks like Netanyahu's calling the shots. You know, we get a ceasefire and Israel breaks it the next day. You know, and that's what Joe Kent said. If we want peace, we got to get Israel under control. We'll say, okay, we're going to defend you, but we aren't going to have you give you any offensive weapons. And if you attack, you're on your own. He said that's the only way. But it seems like they control so many levels of government. You know, Trump went in there to drain the swamp. When's the last time he said that? And Kash Patel's, you know, apparently Iran hacked into one of his pedophile this adult website, hacked in, and they released some of that stuff. So then that Valhalla did a show on it, mocking them, and YouTube took it down. It's like, oh, you can't talk about that. And they might use these, viruses coming up again. You know, they're putting things in place. I just hope enough people resist. I think there's going to be a lot more people resisting this time than last time. I think fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But it is amazing how many people still drink the Kool-Aid.
Well, and they might this time, because I think the new virus has like a 35% chance of killing you. If you get it, you're dead.
Really?
35% of the time. So that's going to scare people.
Yeah, and I encourage the High Wire too. That's a good source. I haven't missed the Jackson Report on the High Wire since 2020. I trust them. They'll show the headlines, then they'll show what's happening behind the headlines. And so then you can make an informed decision. And we listened to that a little bit today. But yeah, we need information. We need to help people wake up. And now when I get in these conversations, I can't just start with the straight, of Hormuz. I have to start with, hey, who do you trust? What source of information do you trust after COVID? What source of information? And start with that. And it's like, so anyhow, this isn't kind of off topic, but I think it's important that we have all the information to make informed decisions in a lot of different areas. And it's sad that this is where our country is, but it's very apparent where our country is. And now what are we going to do? Maybe there's going to be a third party. All they'd have to do is say, well, release the Epstein files and not have a war. And you'd get a lot of people from both parties, because both parties are really shooting themselves in the foot. So that's what I'd like. And then we got to have hand-counted ballots. And one day, no more mail-in ballots. When Massey's opponent got 10,000 mail-in ballots, and the opponents before him where he got like 100, and he lost by 10,000 or something like that. So yeah, the election process, but I think the more people get informed, and Tucker, he was hopeful. He was hopeful that change would come.
He does believe that.
Yeah, I think he thinks this is we have to do something. We can't allow this.
Is he thinking the change will come in November with the election? Or
I don't know. It might take longer than that. I think, I'd love to see in Kentucky, everybody write in Massey. That's what I'd love to see. Because people aren't going to vote for this guy. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, if they get counted properly. But anyhow, so with that, I suppose I got to be out of here in 25 minutes. But feel free to talk amongst yourself or ask more questions. Yeah, it's an exciting time that we're living in. And, it is like that Valhalla. It's like, what do we do? And he goes, I'm not sure. But I think the more we keep spreading this, the harder it is for them to censor it. Because what Charlie would say, there's more of us than them. And he was always a happy warrior, apparently. And I just think, that people might be more open to hearing the gospel as the times are more uncertain. And so we just share the gospel and pray for the best, pray for open doors. I pray for spiritual wickedness to be cast down in high places. I pray for evildoers to be brought to justice, and protection for those who are shining the light on this evil. Because my, oh my. Because when Charlie got shot, I was wondering, okay, what's Candace going to do? And apparently she got a call from Andrew Kovic that said, it was supposed to be you. You and Tucker are on a list. Yeah. And so she thinks that might have been an attempt to silence her, scare her into silence. So he was shot on Wednesday. On Thursday, she had a show memorializing him. So he was such a happy warrior. And then she couldn't finish the show. She had about 20 minutes. And then on Monday, she was on and she was mad. She said, I choose anger, because she saw all the